Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we are looking for the best of fun escapist books. We are reviewing today a book in the young adult general fiction category, The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This was written in 1967, or at least that's when it was published, and it was written by a 16-year-old, which was really impressive when I read that. But it's about young adults dealing with tough choices, including the peer pressure and social class structure differences and tragedy and unhappy home situations and gang life and a whole bunch of themes all kind of wrapped around being a teenager in less than ideal circumstances. And it brings up a lot of philosophical musings, questioning why life is the way it is. So it was a really, I can see why it's a classic. Okay, so let's start with things I like about the book. So one of the things I like about the book is our main character, Pony Boy. Very interesting name. He is one of three brothers, the youngest. He's about 14 years old, and he makes very reasonable choices in his life. So he's got bad circumstances. His parents have died. He's kind of being raised by his older brothers, and he's in a gang, although not necessarily, I think, what we would think of as a classic gang. Just it's very informal. Friends in the neighborhood get together, the Greasers, and that was really interesting. The Greasers, who like their hair gel and their hair long and slicked back and stuff. Anyway, and they're all from the wrong side of the tracks, so to speak, poor neighborhood, and they defend their neighborhood from Ponzi, rich gang members from, other neighborhoods. And anyway, Pony Boy, in these circumstances, a lot of things kind of come his way, fall his way. And he doesn't always make perfect choices, but he tends to make very reasonable choices given his circumstances. So, for example, some older high school girls in a theater sitting in front of him are being harassed a little bit by an older high school person from their side of the tracks, one of their gang members. And Pony Boy, stands up and is like, get lost, they're fine, stop bothering them, that kind of thing. He could have stayed back and just not gotten involved, or even laughed at the girls as, they're visibly uncomfortable. But instead he steps up and then, has a conversation with them, and, it ends up smoothing over, and it's nice. So this was just an example of an interaction that Pony Boy makes good choices. Again, not every choice he makes is perfect. For example, he briefly runs away from home, and you kind of go, well, he didn't necessarily need to do that. It was a little bit of an overreaction for the circumstances, but you can relate to, you can understand his motivation for doing that. So I think the author did a great job of making the characters people that feel real, feel relatable, feel like they're trying their best to deal with life as it comes. So I liked our main character. There were a lot of other people in the gang, getting his two brothers, several friends. He's the youngest of the gang, and all of the characters have very different personalities for the most part. It kind of comes in a rush. He basically does, here's this person, give a paragraph description, and here's this person, give a paragraph description, and here's this person, give a paragraph description, which could be a little bit much at first, but the author does a pretty decent job going down through the book, as long as you read it kind of all at once, to be able to keep your characters separate. There's one thing that I will disagree with the author's choices, which is having one brother named Derry and one other friend named Dolly. D-A-L-L-Y versus D-A-R-R-Y. And I was like, couldn't you have made the names slightly more distinguished so you can sit there and go, which one was this? Was this the brother? Was this the other guy? I didn't. I don't like it when authors make their names too similar because it can be really hard to figure out which character you're talking about. But that's the side note. Anyway, another thing I liked about the story was the class struggle theme. So the theme is really strongly, I felt, I mean, I haven't looked to see what other people think the themes are, but is really about that class struggle in America that is not based on, aristocracy like you would find in England, but rather financial freedom. The upper elites who have it all and are spoiled rotten and, have nice sports cars, a Corvette or something like that, versus Ponyboy's level, which is people are shoplifting and smoking pot and doing things that are very questionable, carrying around a switchblade or whatever. And you look at that and there's a lot of themes of how circumstances would be different depending on which class you were in. If you were in the upper class, these are the consequences. But if you're in the lower class, these are the consequences. And it discusses that issue a lot in the book of how society perceives you and how society, I guess you could say, punishes you depending on which class you're in for the circumstances that happen to fall on you. And how you can shift classes a little bit. It talks about that. If you work really hard, get a great job and an education, could you move up to this other class? What about if you're a hero, you do something heroic, would that elevate you to a different class? And what about if one of these social elites ends up doing something horrible? Does that decrease their class, or are they still in that upper class and they just have different consequences? So it talks about that a lot, and I liked the way it did it without sounding preachy. It also didn't make it feel too oppressive. I'm not really a fan of books where the main character is constantly oppressed, and this does not happen despite the fact that he is in the lower class. This is not about oppression. This is about just that struggle to survive where you're at against circumstances and against expectations and against consequences, that kind of thing. Another thing I like about this is it's very age appropriate. So this is meant to be a young adult book, and it feels like it in a lot of respects. Although adult, for me, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good book for an adult as well. It would just feel a little bit more shallow, I think, to an adult. But for a young adult, it was very appropriate. It did not have much in the way of swearing. It did not have gore, despite the fact that there were several instances that could have been described very gory. You had several characters dying. You had a big gang fight, including people being pretty severely injured. But it doesn't come across as gory or celebrating violence. It just is kind of like, this is the way life is. Very matter of fact, and not dwelling on any of the blood and guts such as it has. So I liked that. There's no romantic anything really in this book either. So I like that. There is a little bit of good in how the characters are talking about family relationships too. There's lots of character growth as far as our main character understanding his older brothers better. I did like that as well. It is a fast-paced book. It's fairly short, and it's well written. I mean, it really is. I was really very much marveling at the fact that a 16-year-old wrote this book, because it doesn't feel like it was immature. It feels like it was really well written, really thoughtfully written. It also, I will say, would make a good book club book. There's lots of things that would make for good discussion questions. Statements people make, circumstances and how they turn out, things like that would make a lot of really interesting discussion questions. I can see why a lot of high schools, at least at one point, had this as a required reading, because it would make for good things to ponder for young adults. Okay, there are a handful of things I didn't like about this book. One of which is this edges more towards a tragedy than a hopeful, positive, fun story. There are several character deaths. I'm not going to spoil it by telling you who and why and how and everything, but there's at least two or three, and but having said that, it doesn't have a depressing ending. You kind of have, I wouldn't necessarily say hopeful, but more like healing. It feels like our characters are going to move forward despite the tragedy, and maybe they'll learn from it, maybe they won't, but life goes on. And it doesn't have an emotionally crushing weight for the reader. Something tragic happens, but again, it's a little bit more matter of fact. It's like, this just is depressing, but life goes on. And so I kind of liked that. I mean, I don't love sad books, but this didn't really make me feel sad. More just like, life sucks, move on kind of feel to it. But again, with a fairly positive, not perfect, like it doesn't make everything all better, but still a good ending. So I didn't love that. It could be a little depressing sometimes to read about bad things happening to people, Another thing is there's lots of smoking, like all the characters do. And that's kind of funny, like our main character, 14-year-old, smoking a pack a day of cigarettes and kind of like, whatever, everybody does it, right? And this was written in the 60s, so maybe everybody did at that point, but it's really, it's a little bit much for today. There's a little bit of drugs, hints of something more, sex, but nothing actually happens there. There's obviously the violence. There's drinking, including getting drunk, and there's some abusive relationships, like one character's parents don't care about him, kick him out, yell at him, hit him, that kind of stuff. Our main character gets slapped by one of his brothers that's supposed to be taking care of him. Just things like that, that it's not necessarily all shiny and positive in that respect. So it comes across as real, especially for the era, but it can be a little bit much perhaps for wanting to have a young child read this. So it's definitely not juvenile fiction. The other thing I would say I don't necessarily love about this is I'm not sure that this isn't looking at gang life with a little bit of rose-tinted glasses, right? Like, I was reading this going, when I picture modern gangs and gang life, this felt very light on that. It didn't feel very realistic on that. It felt a little bit more old-fashioned, perhaps, or again, rose-colored glasses, somebody looking nostalgically at it or positively about it in a way that I'm not sure is actually realistic. It's something that, again, you may have to discuss it with somebody else and go, do you really think it was ever really like that? Is it like that today? I'm not so sure it really is. I've never been in a gang, so what do I know? But it's not the impression I get. I feel like modern gangs are a lot more violent and a lot less family, perhaps, than what this describes it as. But again, I could be wrong, not having experienced that myself. But it did feel a little bit superficial in some areas. Finally, it is in the first-person voice. Some people don't like that. Ponyboy is the sole viewpoint you get for the story. I think it worked out really well, but some people don't like that. So those are the things I didn't like. Not very much, not very strong. Overall, I didn't expect to, but surprisingly, I did enjoy it. I thought it was well written enough to be enjoyable and to be recommended. So I'm going to put it in my 2 thumbs up. If you haven't ever read it before, I suggest you do so. I think that this is a classic that's worth reading. I say classic, I mean, it's not quite old enough to be in public domain yet, so we'll say classic. But it was it was good. It was well written. I think it will be a classic, one of those books that can still be read, whatever it is, 70 years down the road, and feel like it still has something to say. So, yeah. Thank you for watching, and I hope you join me next week.